Our God is still on his throne and ruling the affairs of man. Even as he does not change, his truths have not changed. Thankfully, God still has a people which proclaim that old-time religion, setting forth his sovereignty, and the old paths of truth where we can find rest for our souls. Welcome to Word of Sovereign Grace, a ministry of Paradise Primitive Baptist Church in Arlington, Texas. Get your Bible, call your friends, and sit back as we open the King James Scriptures to explore the glorious Word of Sovereign Grace. Here's this week's message.
They come to John the Baptist and they said, listen, the man that was with you in Jordan, you know, the one you bore witness to, said, he's over here baptized and everybody's going to him. In other words, as we put it this day, that preacher over there is baptizing more people than you are. Now, trying to get something stirred up, the old green eye, they're saying, look, he's baptizing more folks than you are. And they would expect John the Baptist to say something derogatory about him and began to be jealous. John the Baptist said, wait a minute, boys. I told you. You're witnesses of the fact. I've told you I'm not the Christ. I've come to bear witness of the Christ. That my day is coming to an end. But you see, his day is coming to be more prominent. And the longer he's here, fellas, he's going to become more prominent and even more prominent. He told them, he says, John answered and said in verse 27, a man can receive nothing except it be given him from heaven. You see, John the Baptist never came to this earth to build his own church. John the Baptist never came to this earth to start his own sect or group of people. John the Baptist came to this earth in a particular office. He is the only one in the history of the universe that has ever held the position that he held. No one else ever held a position like John the Baptist, and no one else ever will hold a position like John the Baptist. He is truly one of a kind. His office is a peculiar office only to him. And when you think about it in Matthew chapter 3 and verse 13, that Matthew tells us in his record that Jesus came from Galilee to Jordan to be baptized of John. Now, why did he travel all those miles on foot, no doubt, from Galilee to Jordan to be baptized of John? Because John was the only man that had been given the authority to baptize at that time. Do you still think anybody's baptism is valid? Can just anybody baptize? No, my friends. If Jesus walked all the way from Galilee to Jordan to be baptized, doesn't it make sense that today that there is still a group of people that have scriptural authority to baptize? Could Jesus have been baptized by anyone, anywhere, at any time, and it's still been scriptural, and still having the authority of God? He went to the only man in the universe that had the scriptural authority, or we'll say this way, the authority of God to baptize, and that was John the Baptist. And his baptism was valid baptism. Now we notice here that we find John saying that a man can receive nothing except it be given him from heaven. You see, John the Baptist received a commission from God. John the Baptist received authority from God. But so did Jesus Christ. Let's see about John's commission. We find, if you can go over the Old Testament, over the New Testament, and you'll find many things that was said about John the Baptist. But we won't just look at just one. We looked at some of those things. That I believe it was one of the Wednesday or Thursday night. We looked at that where in the first chapter of the book of John that the priests and the Levites came from Jerusalem and they asked John who he was and who art thou? He confessed and denied not, but confessed, I am not the Christ. They asked him, what then, art thou Elias? And he said, I'm not. Art thou that prophet? He answered, no. Then they said unto him, who art thou? That we may give an answer to them that sent us. What sayest thou of thyself? He said, I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord, as said the prophet Isaiah. And it was prophesied, by Isaiah. He said, prepare the way of the Lord. He is the forerunner of Jesus Christ. And what we want to look at tonight is as his particular office as the friend of the bridegroom. Now, we think about the friend of the bridegroom, we think, well, he was a friend of the bridegroom. That doesn't mean a whole lot to me. But in that day and time, there was a particular office of the friend of the bridegroom. And he had a very particular role to play. John says, I am the friend of the bridegroom. I'm not the bridegroom. The one that has the bride, he's the bridegroom. I'm just a friend of the bridegroom. We're going to notice here, the Lord willing, in a little while, what that friend of the bridegroom's position was. But let's notice here in the Scripture how that John declared he was not the Christ, John the Baptist, but that one was coming after him, preferred before him. And we're going to find it capsulized here in the book of John, in John chapter 1 and verse 6. We're going to find something about John's office. He says there was a man sent from God whose name was John. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. John the Baptist had received authority and a commission of God. He was a man, but he was sent from God. And that's one thing that the church needs to understand about every God-called minister across the land today, is that he is a man sent from God. He is called, has qualified himself, and there in him is demonstrated the call of God to preach His unsearchable riches. But you've got to keep this balance, or you're going to run into trouble. I believe it was that Solomon said that a false balance is an abomination, or a false weight is an abomination. There, when they used to have the scales, when they would weigh in things, they'd have the scales, and sometimes they would falsely weigh those scales and make them weigh falsely for where they could get more for less. They'd have to pay less for something to get more of it because they would falsely weight the scales. He says that's an abomination. And my friends, you get these two things out of whack here, out of proper weight and significance, and you're going to have problems on your hands. Because he says there was a man sent from God whose name was John. You've got to have the fact that he's a man balanced with the fact that he's sent from God, that he is called of God to preach the unsearchable riches of Christ. You've got to have that in the proper balance, you see. Because if you have the man, that he's a man, and you have it weighted, and that has the preeminence to you, then my friends, you're going to have to say, well, it doesn't make any difference what he says anyway. He's just a man. I can do what I want to. He doesn't have any authority to tell me what to do, how to do. I'm an individual here. I've got my rights. I can make my choices. He doesn't have any business telling me what to do. He's just a man like I am. Well, that's true. Elijah was a man of like passions as we were. He was a man just like us, but yet God used him in a very great way. And he says there was a man sent from God whose name was John. John was just a man. But my friends, I'll tell you, God used him in a way that has never been since the beginning of this world, and since his promise and his commission came to an end, there has never been and never will be another one like this man. He is a man, but he's sent from God. Now, on the other hand, we've had many problems created among the church in years past and even in the present day when we try to take the other side of that balance and we get it out of focus. We can terribly diminish the effectiveness of a God-called man by saying he's just a man. But it's interesting that the other side, having that false weight and that false balance there, will also terribly diminish his effectiveness. Because when we start to thinking he's sent from God, and we start thinking more of the man than we do the God he preaches, and we start thinking more of the man than we do the Christ he preaches, then my friends, you're going to see God take that man down. Now that'll happen. I've seen it happen. You've seen it happen. How that men who were prominent in the Scriptures and were able, called of God, to preach and proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ, because of not them necessarily, but because of the people, placing them upon a pedestal and saying they're sent from God, and seemingly just worshiping their words instead of the Christ they're talking about. And this is all in the subject now, because we're talking about the friend of the bridegroom, and you'll understand the significance of that when the people began to worship the words of the man more than the words of Christ, and they elevate him and place him on a pedestal and a place of promise right up there close to the Godhead itself, my friends, you can mark it down. In some manner, that man's prominence among his people, the people who he's shepherding, the people who he's serving, the people who he's preaching to, in some way, that man's effectiveness is going to be diminished. I heard a preacher say the other, we were talking about this the other night, heard a preacher say about preachers, he says they all love to talk. Now I think that goes with a calling for some reason, because I know a brother back home in Tennessee, and Elder Joel Hurst, a very faithful minister of the gospel, a young minister, and he's doing very well, and the Lord is blessing his ministry. But I can remember a few years ago when I knew Brother Joel, years and years before he was ever even exercising among the churches up there. We'd go in for meetings, and I would see Brother Doyle, and you'd almost have to knock him down to get him to say anything to you. And now it's been made manifest. The Lord's called him to preach, and now you can't shut him up. I think that just kind of comes with the call a little bit. Don't blame that all on the preachers. But you see, my friends, here's a man that has a call of God. But I heard a preacher say the other day, he says if your preacher can't preach, he said preachers love to preach. And he said if your preacher can't preach, he said just brag on him. He said he'll preach himself to death. And he said take him out of the way. Just brag on him. Maybe I should have said that, Brother Don.
Don't worry about it.
But he says if you want to get your preacher out of the way, you can't preach, then just brag on him, so he'll preach himself to death. But you see, my friends, you can get that equation out of balance. You got a problem. There was a man sent from God. Listen, this old idea about you don't need to study, you just walk up in the pulpit on Sunday morning, and God will just open up your hand and pour it through like right out of the pitcher, and it'll come right out your mouth. Listen, my friends, those Bereans were more noble than the Thessalonians because they took the word that was preached. They received it with all readiness of mind, and here's just an aside. They received it with readiness of mind. They didn't have their mind on 1,100 other things out there. They didn't have their mind on the job or on the family or on the problems. They had their mind on the preaching of the gospel. They received the word with all readiness of mind. They didn't receive the word being so tired because on Saturday night they stayed up 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Or they had been doing this or they had been doing that, and their mind was so tired and so stressed out that they couldn't receive the word with all readiness of mind. They received the word with readiness of mind. There was an eagerness, there was a willingness, there was a desire to receive the preaching of the gospel. They were wanting it. They were thirsting after it. They were hungering after it. They received the word with all readiness of mind and searched the Scriptures every once in a while to see if those things, they searched the Scriptures daily to see that those things were so. My friends, I've heard people say, well, we'd like for, we've been having, well, I don't want to get into all that, but anyway, let me say this. Just let me say this without going into all that. If you want to study the Bible, and I'm telling you Bible study is not good, it is a necessity. Everybody hear that? I need to say it again. It's a necessity. If you take what your pastor preaches to you, and if you just jot down a note or two, or whatever, how you want to do it, and you remember it or whatever, and you take what he says home with you, and you go to the text that he uses, and you run the references, and you do the legwork through the Scriptures, let your fingers do the walking through the Bible, and you start studying what he has preached to you, and you take even if it's a basic framework of information, and you build upon that framework and build upon that foundation, my friends, there's enough to keep you busy from Monday through Saturday if you'll take what he says and study it out in God's Word. Even if it's just framework of information, even if it's just a foundation of a subject matter, or a text, or a thought, or an idea. Because the Scriptures go together like this. And you're going to find those references and those connecting thoughts elsewhere in the Scriptures. So we're going to find those Bereans were more noble than those Thessalonians. Why? Because they received the Word with all readiness of mind. God's people need to receive the preaching of the gospel with readiness of mind. They need to be ready. And that doesn't mean coming out to the house of God, everybody's running late. Well, I saw a lot of people look at each other then. Everybody's running late, you know. And you get to the house of God, you're cold as a cucumber, and you want to go in there and sit down, and you expect the preacher to bring glory down. Does that sound like readiness of mind? Well, you see what the Scripture is telling us here about receiving the Word with readiness of mind. Don't need to go into all that. That's off the subject matter, but I want you to understand. Receiving the Word with all readiness of mind. Taking what that man of God who's called of God to preach the gospel, taking what he says and studying that in the Word of God. That'll keep you busy Monday through Saturday. But we have to have the proper balance here. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. The point is this, that God's not going to bring a man up here without applying himself. He's got to apply himself in the study of the Word of God. I heard a man say one time that he told this preacher, he was meeting him on Thursday or Friday, and the preacher had his Bible open. He was reading his Bible, and the other preacher asked him, he said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm studying my Bible." He said, "I've got a text on my mind, and I'm studying it in case that's what's on my mind Sunday morning. Now, the Lord bless me to preach on it." He said, "You mean you're studying for Sunday right now?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Well, I don't ever study for Sunday morning until after I slop the halls on Sunday morning. And I study what I'm going to preach about." The preacher told him, he said, "I'd not rather eat the slop you're feeding your hogs than listen to you preach." You're not going to get up here, friend, and God's going to open the lid of your head and pour it through. And this goes for me as much as for any man that's in the ministry in the Old Baptist Church. Listen, don't take everything out of an Old Baptist pulpit like a parachute down from glory. Take it and study the Word of God. If it's right, rejoice in it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. John had a commission. John had a calling. Now John says of himself, and John says here in John 3:27, John answered and said, "A man can receive nothing except it be given him from heaven." And what John is saying there, he's saying, look, if this man Jesus is baptizing, and he's baptizing everybody, he couldn't receive that unless God had sent him for that office, if most of the people over there where he and his disciples are baptizing, that's just fine. Because a man can receive nothing unless he receives it from God. You see, God is with him. God has blessed him. God has ordained him to that work, or God has called him to that ministry. And he says, if God has called him, if God has ordained him, in this case it was Christ, he says, God sent him. And we find that authorization that Jesus had over in the 5th chapter of the book of Hebrews. And there's quite a bit here, but we'll just begin reading in verse 1 of Hebrews chapter 5. "For every high priest taken from among men is ordained for men in things pertaining to God, that he may offer both gifts and sacrifices for sins, who can have compassion on the ignorant and on them that are out of the way, for that he himself also is compassed with infirmity. And by reason hereof he ought, as for the people, so also for himself, to offer for sins. And no man taketh this honor unto himself, but he that is called of God, as was Aaron. So also Christ glorified not himself to be made a high priest, But he that said unto him, Thou art my son, today have I begotten thee, as he said also in another place, Thou art a priest forever, after the order of Melchizedek. You see, Jesus Christ was made a high priest, not of his own persuasion, not of his own calling, but he was called of God and high priest as after the order of Melchizedek. God told Christ, You are a priest forever, after the order. See, he received his authority straightly from his Father. He did not take this position of prominence on his own. He did not place himself in this position. He was carrying out the will of the Father. He was carrying out the commission from his Father. So you see, John says, look, I had my time. I received this commission of God. I was a forerunner. Now Christ has come. I told you he was the Christ. I told you I was sent to bear witness of the Christ. Now he's come. My day is beginning to lose prominence, and he is beginning to grow in prominence. And he said, boys, I told you all along, this is just the way it's going to be. He tells them, Ye yourselves bear me witness that I said I am not the Christ, but that I am sent before him. He that hath the bride is the bridegroom, but the friend of the bridegroom. I'd like to look tonight a little bit at that office of the friend of the bridegroom. Historians tell us in the days that this was written, in days preceding this, that when a young man and young lady were espoused to one another, or when we would think about as them being engaged, that they would have no personal correspondence. They wouldn't see one another until the time of the marriage. And then the way they would correspond between each other is the bridegroom, the groom, as we would think of it, had a friend. It was like the best man, maybe we would think of in our wedding ceremonies today. He was the friend of the bridegroom. And all the communication between the groom and the bride-to-be were done through this friend of the bridegroom. He would be the one that would send messages from the groom to the bride. If the groom wanted to say something to the bride, he would send it by the friend of the bridegroom. And the friend of the bridegroom was very close and very dear to the groom, to the bridegroom. He loved him. He hung on every word that he said because he had a message that the bridegroom was going to give him to deliver to the bride. And that message had to be delivered just exactly like the bridegroom stated it. So he was very intent on every word and on the intent of every thought of the word that the bridegroom gave him, so when he went to the bride, he could give him exactly the same message with the same intent. And the bridegroom, his only position, his sole position, was to be there, the friend of the bridegroom's sole position, and his office was to be there at the beck and call of the bridegroom. Now you see very clearly here that John the Baptist is fulfilling that position. We find this very similar position to this over in the Old Testament book of Genesis. We're going to find a time over there when you're familiar with this story, I trust, and know that you are. Going to find a time there when Abraham is very old and he's going to send his servant out to find a bride for his son Isaac. Very wonderful story, very much significance there, and symbolism. Beautiful story that we have. We find here that Abraham is going to send his servant out to find a bride for Isaac, and he calls the servant in, and he tells him that I'm sending you forth back to my kindred. I don't want my son to have a wife from the daughters of Canaan. I'm going to send you back to the land of my kindred, and I want you to go there and find a wife for my son. And we find that the man asks a question, and I love this point here in the Scriptures, and we'll not get into all the symbolism in here, but it's a very rich and beautiful narrative that we have here. Then the servant said unto him, this is in Genesis chapter 24. Genesis chapter 24 and verse 5, and the servant said unto him, Peradventure the woman will not be willing to follow me unto this land, lest I needs bring thy son again into the land from which thou camest? And Abraham said unto him, Beware that thou bring not my son thither again. The servant of Abraham said, What if I get over there and I find the lady that you're talking and sending me to get, but she didn't want to come back? What am I going to do then? And listen to what Abraham said. You see, God had given Abraham a promise. He made a covenant with Abraham. By the way, when he made that covenant with Abraham, the Bible tells us in the beginning of the first few chapters of the book of Genesis, about the 12th chapter on through, we read about the covenant God made with Abraham, that God caused a sleep to fall upon Abraham. But before that, he gave Abraham some instructions on how he was going to make an oath. He's going to confirm the covenant that he made with Abraham. And he had him divide several of the animals there, as was custom in that day, divide them in half. The larger animals were cut in half and placed separated here in a little walkway fashion. And the smaller animals, the birds and the turtle doves and whatever, were placed on each side. One on each side. And God caused a sleep to come on Abraham. Very important point. And when it was about evening, the presence of God walked between, or passed between the pieces of those dead animals. In this covenant that God made with Abraham, or the way they made covenants then, is the signatories, or the parties of that covenant, would pass between those pieces of those dead animals. Do you realize here that Abraham didn't walk between the pieces of those dead animals? The power of God passed between those pieces of the animals. That was a covenant that the Godhead was a signatory to, and Abraham was a recipient of it. And we today are recipients of that same promise, because it's a spiritual promise too. God made a promise to Abraham, and he told him that in Isaac shall thy seed be called, and in Isaac shall all the nations of the world be blessed. Isaac, therefore, becomes very important. And Abraham puts a great deal of significance on who Isaac's bride is going to be. And it would do well for every father to place a great deal of significance on who the bride of his son is going to be. So it is, the parents of the bride should place a great deal of significance on who the groom of their bride is going to be. Great deal of significance here placed on this. If God had promised Abraham so much and had given him a covenant like he had done, they're going to place a great deal of emphasis on who the bride of Isaac is. So anyway, listen to what Abraham tells his servant. When his servant comes back to Abraham, he says, what if she doesn't come back with you? Listen to what Abraham said. Such a statement of faith. He says there in Genesis 24 and 7, here's his answer. The Lord God of heaven, which took me from my father's house, and from the land of my kindred, and which spake unto me, and that sware unto me, saying, Unto thy seed will I give this land, he shall send his angels before thee, or his angel before thee, and thou shalt take a wife unto my son from thence. You see, Abraham is not saying, well, maybe it will fail. Maybe the whole shooting match will go down. Maybe he won't ever get a bride. No, Abraham looked back to the faithfulness of God who called him, and he said, listen, he said, the same God that called me, the same God that delivered me where I am today, he is going to see that my son gets a bride. That great faith in the promise of God, and that's where our faith is tonight. Same God that saw you through yesterday will see you through today, and my friends, he'll see you tomorrow. See you through tomorrow. I found a little saying one time recently that I like an awful lot. It says, we may not know what tomorrow holds, but we know who holds tomorrow. My friends, the never-changing God, who has us in the palms of his hands, is going to watch over and care for his people. And our answer every day that we live, we don't know what we're going to face today, but we know the God that has led us unerring all down the days of our lives and has been faithful to us all the days of our lives. We don't know what today holds, but we know that same God that's delivered us in days past is going to be with me today. We're going to have have the attitude, we ought to have the attitude that the Apostle Paul said, without him I can do nothing. But I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. That God's going to deliver. Abraham said, I'm not worried about it. He said, God delivered me this far, He's going to see me through. So his servant goes out, and he comes down to where he's going to find Rebekah. And this servant has a plan in his mind. He says, whenever the women come down here to get water, he says, I'll ask the question if I can have some water. And if she says, yes, you can have water, may I water your camels too? He says, I'll know that she's the one. And the Bible tells us over there, in the 24th chapter, he says, it came to pass in verse 15, Genesis 24:15, and it came to pass before he had done speaking, that behold, Rebekah came out. Before he ever got that thought out of his mouth, that a damsel would come down, he would ask if he might have water. She would say, here's you some water. Can I water your camels also? Before he even got the thought out of his mouth, here comes Rebekah. See how God works? And he asked Rebekah that. May I have a drink? You know what she said? Sure. Here's a drink. Can I water your camels too? He says, where do you live? Who's your parents? Who's your folks? And she told him who her people were. You know who they were? Kinsmen of Abraham. How about that? Yeah. How about that? They go, she takes him to her house, and they try to feed him. You know what he said? Genesis 24, verse 33. And there was set meat before him to eat. But he said, I will not eat until I have told my errand. You see, his errand. See, he's acting here in a great deal as the friend of the bridegroom. He says, I'm not going to eat till I tell you what I'm here for. You see, telling his message and telling his errand was more important than eating. You know why? Because he was so intent on what his master said for him to do. He says, I'm not going to eat till I tell you why I'm here. And they said, speak on. Well, he goes and he recounts all the story about finding Rebekah. And then a little bit later, he says in verse 49, and now if you will deal kindly and truly with my master, tell me. And if not, tell me, that I may turn to the right hand or to the left. If you're going to go along with what I said, let me know. If you're not, let me know so I can do something else. Don't be lukewarm about it. You remember what happened to those folks in the book of Revelation? That church who had lukewarm folks in it? He says, I would that you were cold or hot. You see, when you're hot, you're going to be trying to get cool. You're going to be making some provision. There's going to be some unsettledness there. If you're cold, you're going to be trying to get warm. There's going to be some movement. There's going to be some activity. If you're just dry, you're going to be at ease inside. Yeah. You know what Amos said about that? Amos chapter 6. Woe to them who are at ease inside. And the Lord told that church over there, He says, I would that you were cold or hot. Be one or the other. He says, if you're going to go along with me, tell me. And if you're not, tell me. Because I've got a way to go. I've got a duty to perform. The Lord said to that church, He says, because thou art neither cold or hot, but lukewarm, I'll spew thee out of my mouth. So it is here in the Old Testament. Abraham's servant saying, don't be lukewarm. Tell me one way or the other. I've got an errand to run. I'm busy. Tell me what to do. Give me your answer. So they asked Rebekah. And then she said, I'll go. The next morning they spend the night. The next morning, her brother said, well, stay here with us 10 days. And then after that 10 days, then we'll tell you whether or not Rebekah can go. This is what he said. Love these words. He says in verse 56 of Genesis 24, and he said unto them, after they said, wait 10 days, and then we'll tell you whether she can go or not. He said unto them, hinder me not, seeing the Lord hath prospered my way. Send me away that I may go to my master. Don't hinder me. Don't get in my way. Brother Jones used to say, you know, there's three kinds of people in the Old Baptist Church. There's the constructionist and the obstructionist and the destructionist. Constructionists want to build. Destructionists want to tear down everything the constructionist is trying to build. The obstructionist doesn't want to build, neither does he want to tear down. He just wants to get in the way of everybody else that's trying to do something. Well, they're playing the obstructionist here. You see, I listen to Paul Jones preaching too a little bit. These people are playing the obstructionist. They say, wait a little while. You ever notice how when God has opened the way, some of God's people want to sit there and say, well, wait a minute now, we just can't go yet. We can't be hasty about this thing. His servant said, wait a minute, I'm here. She said she'll go. We're not going to wait any longer. Don't stand in my way. I'm doing my master's bidding. Can you imagine what it had been like there when the Red Sea was opened up for Israel, when they came out of Egyptian bondage? And Moses was saying speaking to God, what are we going to do, what are we going to do, what are we going to do? And he says, why are you talking to me, Moses? The way is open, go. My friends, doors of opportunity have been opened to the Lord's church. And my friends, because of our unwillingness to walk through the door, that door of opportunity will be closed right in our face. There are times when the church needs to move. There's times the church needs to stand still. There's times in my life and in your individual life that we need to move forward, and there's times we need to stand still. What we have to have is a clear sight of the mission that we have and the errand that we're on, as this servant said. We can't have that our minds all fogged up with the world. We have to have a clear sense of what God is telling us to do. Once He says, do it. Not time to scratch your head and say, well, let's wait 10 days. It's time to move. It's time to move, because God will open that door of opportunity, and you walk through that door of opportunity, my friends, God is going to bless every step that you take. Every way that you'll go, when that door is open, His way, God's going to prosper your steps. And you fail to walk through that door, and the door's going to close. And you try to say, well, you know, maybe that was a pretty good idea we had back there. Let's try it now. You're going to take one step, fall flat on your face. God opens those doors of opportunity. And when He does, and when it's evident that the door is open, it's not time to have a week-long, 10-day-long prayer meeting about it. It's time to go forward. Let us wait 10 days. Servant said, hinder me not. Seeing the Lord hath prospered my way, send me away that I may go to my master. The Lord sent me down here to get a bride for my master's servant, and I've done it. And it's been clearly shown to me by the evidences of God, this is right. But don't hinder me. I've got a job to do. He goes back, and here is one of the beautiful parts that has to do with what we're talking about tonight, this friend of the bridegroom. Here's one of the beautiful parts to this. He gives her some tokens of his master. Some gold bracelets and earrings. Several $1,000s worth of gold he gives her. And that was just a token of his master's love. And now after he and Rebekah and the company that are with him, they're going back over here. And you know what he's taking her as they're riding along on the camels? You know what he's talking to her about? He's not saying, oh, by the way, Rebekah, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've been working for Abraham now for several years, and I've achieved this and I've achieved that. And I've been Abraham's head servant now for many years. And, I just want to give you some of my resume. You know what he's talking to her about all the way back? He's talking to her about Isaac. He's talking to her about the riches of his master's house. He's talking to her about Isaac and what a fine man he is, what a godly man he is. And you know what he's telling her? He's saying about Isaac, he's saying, you know what? Abraham and Sarah, he was 100 years old, and Sarah was 90 years old when Isaac was born. This man that you're going back to marry is a man that's been chosen of God. He's a man that was promised of God. He's telling him about Isaac, about how God had been with him, and how that God said that he's going to be a great nation, and through him, all the nations of the earth was going to be blessed. And my friends, by the time they got back there, Isaac had gone out by the well, it says, to meditate. And she saw Isaac there as they rode up to the spot where Isaac was. She said, "Who is that?" He said, "That's the son of my master." She jumps down off the camel and runs to see Isaac. You know, one of the reasons she was so enthralled and so enamored with Isaac is because the friend of the bridegroom has done his job. God had prospered his way. God was in the matter. He had done his job to tell the bride about her husband, about her spouse. He had built him up. He had showed her what he was. The time came when she was to meet him. She said, "Is that him?" He says, "That's my master's son." She jumps off the camel and takes off too. She has such a great love for him because the friend of the bridegroom had done his job. You see tonight, he that hath the bride, even in 1992, he that hath the bride is the bridegroom. You brother, you brother, you brother, we're not the bridegroom. We're friends of the bridegroom. You know what our job is to do? Our job is to be attentive at the voice of the bridegroom and to get his bride, his church, the picture of her husband, Jesus Christ. And for me, or any other man, or any other organization, or any other church, to come and try to stand in that position, and stand in the way, and stand in the place of the bridegroom, is to be an interloper into that relationship. You see, our business is not to bring attention to ourselves. Our business is to tell you about the bridegroom. Our business is to be messengers of the bridegroom. We find over in the book of Psalm of Solomon a very beautiful picture concerning this bride and this bridegroom. And might I tell you tonight that there is a beautiful picture here of the Lord's church in the world and of how we view the Lord's church. I ask you tonight, how do you see it? I want to read to you a verse of Scripture over in the 48th Psalm. This is a wonderful picture of the Lord's church, and I ask you tonight to examine yourself and your view of the Lord's church and see if this is how you view it. Psalm chapter 48. Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised in the city of our God, in the mountain of His holiness. Beautiful for situation. The joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion. Mount Zion is the Lord's church. The joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great King. God is known in her palaces for a refuge. And he drops down a whole lot of that we love to get to, but we're going to have to pass through it. He says in verse 13, well in verse 12, I know a text that you've heard many times and I love it. Walk about Zion and go around about her. Tell the towers thereof. Mark you well her bulwarks. Consider her palaces, that ye may tell it to the generations following. For this God is our God forever and ever. He will be our guide even unto death. My friends, is that the picture of the Lord's church that you have? Is it beautiful for situation? Is it the joy of the whole earth? Is it the most brightest and most glorious thing that you know of in this world tonight? My friends, I don't know of a thing this side of glory itself that has the blessing, that has the beauty, that has the joy, and that has the gladness when the church hears her husband speak. My friends, you can't get that sitting out on the creek bank fishing. No, 1,000 times no. David said over in the 26th Psalm, he says, Lord, I have loved the habitation of thine house, the place where thine honor dwells. Here in this Song of Solomon, we're going to see a beautiful picture, and I want you to examine it tonight in your mind. And I want you to see how you see the Lord's church. It's His bride. See how you see it? I want to tell you one of the most beautiful pictures here. The Bible tells us in 1 Kings in chapter 4 that Solomon spake 3,000 proverbs and 1,005 songs. And here in the very beginning of this book, in the Song of Solomon, out of 1,005 songs, Solomon starts this book off and he says, the Song of Songs. Out of 1,005 songs, Solomon says, this is the best one of all. Let's see what he says. This Song of Solomon here is about a love story between the two espoused, one to another, the bride and the bridegroom. This is a picture of the Lord and His church. Notice here in the Song of Solomon, in chapter 2, there's many places that we'd love to go, but we're going to have to skip down. Song of Solomon, chapter 2, and verse 10. He says, notice here is the bride speaking about her bridegroom. She says, my beloved spake. Listen, you may say, so what? He said something. Big deal. He said something. I want you to see that the love that this bridegroom had for her husband was so great that she hung on every word that he said. My beloved spake. And he said unto me, rise up, my love. We sang that song tonight. Brother Rob, I'm glad you called for that. My beloved spake and said unto me, rise up, my love, my fair one, and come away. Why? Come away to a land that's destitute. Come away to a land that's a wasteland. Come away to a land that's spiritless. Come away to a land that's dry and unfruitful. No, my friends, listen to what her love said to her. My beloved spake and said unto me, rise up, my love, my fair one, and come away. For lo, the winter is past, the rain is over and gone, the flowers appear on the earth, the time of the singing of the birds is come, and the voice of the turtle, that is the turtle dove, is heard in our land. The fig tree putteth forth her green figs, and the vines with a tender grape get a good smell. Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away. The winter is past. The time when the cold and wintry blast that would chill and would make cold and frigid, those days are over. All the times of the winter cold is past. The winter is past. And he says the rain is over and gone. The time of the spring rains have come, and they have gone, and they have done just like Isaiah 55 that we looked at last night said. They have watered the earth that it might bring forth and bud and give a beautiful situation here. Notice what it says. The winter blast is gone. And he says the spring rains have come and watered the earth. And he says, for lo, the winter is past, the rain is over and gone. The flowers appear on the earth. The time of singing of birds has come. Can you think of anything more beautiful? Beautiful spring morning. Maybe after you've had a little spring rain, and the next morning you get up and there's a bright, clear, sunshiny day, and the trees are beautiful, and the sky is beautiful, and the grass is beautiful, and the flowers are beautiful, and the birds are singing, and you think this is just a beautiful day, and you think of that text you brought out the other night. This is the day that the Lord hath made. We will rejoice and be glad in it, my friends. Well, let me give you some news tonight, my beloved. Here, that this is the day that the Lord has made. The New Testament church day, the gospel day, the day of grace. This is the day that the Lord has made. And if there's ever a time that God's people ought to rejoice and see the beauty of Zion and see it as the beauty of the whole earth, nothing comparable to it, nothing to compare to it. It's this day. Because the winter cold is past, the rains have come and gone, the flowers are budding and beautiful. And he goes on to say that the flowers appear on the earth. The time of the singing of the birds has come, and the voice of the turtle dove is heard in our land. The fig tree putteth forth her green figs, and the vines with tender grape give a good smell. Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away. My friends, the place to which your Lord wants to carry you on this side of heaven, that's the most glorious place on the face of this earth, is beautiful for situation. The Lord is not going to call you, and He's not going to indict it in your heart to join up and to spiritual city. You're going to see the beauty of that city. And it's going to be just like Jerusalem, set on a hill, the light thereof cannot be hid. You see, there's nothing wrong with the Lord's church. There's some things wrong with the people in it. My friends, let me tell you, the church as God set it up, as Jesus set it up when He was in this earth, it doesn't need reforming. It doesn't need changing. All it needs, see, it's a perfect situation. It's the joy of the whole earth. All it needs is these people to come in and walk in the way that they ought to walk. And when they do that, they have the blessings of God untold, poured out upon them in measure. Malachi says, you won't even be able to contain it. When we come into the house of God and we take our place, whatever it is, wherever God has called us, whatever He's enabled us to do, and we come in and take our place in the house of God, you know what you're going to see? You're not going to see a barren and dry land. You're not going to see a wasteland. But my friends, you're going to see a beautiful place where there's a sweet smelling odor in the air, where the flowers are there, where the trees are green, where the grass is green, where the birds are singing. You're going to find a beautiful place. And it's the most beautiful place this side of heaven itself. You see, what I'm trying to do tonight is tell you what your husband has prepared for you. Now, you can come to Arkadelphia, Arkansas, and you can walk all around my house, and you can tell me what color it is. You can tell me what style of house it is. You can tell me probably that my grass needs cutting about now. You can tell me that whatever needs to be done around there needs to be done. You can tell me how many windows there are in the house. Tell me what kind of roof I've got on it. But you're not going to be able to tell me one thing about the inside of it until you get on the inside. Now see, I'm telling you about a beautiful place that God has for His people. You can stand on the outside of it all your life. And you can behold the beauty of the outside of it. And you can eat some of the crumbs off the Master's table. My friends, if you want the full benefit of it, come in and smell the flowers. Come in and hear the birds singing. Come in and take part in what is the best side, the best thing this side of heaven itself. To where people love you. And they care for you. And they want to see you succeed. People there that'll pray for you and take care of you and watch over you. This is the joy of the whole earth, friend. This is the best it gets, this side of glory. Notice what he says. The fig tree putteth forth her green figs, the vines with a tender grape give a good smell. Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away to this place. This is what the Lord has prepared for His bride in this world. My friends, Solomon said here, over there in the Song of Solomon, he says, He hath led me to His banqueting house, and His banner, or He brought me to the banqueting house, rather, in 2nd chapter, verse 4. He brought me to the banqueting house, and His banner over me was love. Don't tell me that if you love the Lord's church, that you can eat just as well sitting on the outside of the banquet house that you can on the inside. That wonderful meal that was prepared down there tonight, it was wonderful. So graciously prepared as all the meals have been. Every one of them has just been delight. But don't tell me that you can stand outside the door down there, the basement. Stand out there and set you a chair up and say, I'm enjoying this meal just as good right here as I would if I was sitting down there at the table. It tastes wonderful when you haven't even tasted it. And I can come up there and I can say, hey, don't you want to come in and taste how good this is down here? I'm telling you, this certain dish is delicious. You just got to have some of this dish over here. You'll just never taste anything better than this dessert over here. It's so good. And you say, well, I'm sitting out here and I'm just enjoying it just as good as you want it. I can love it just as good as you do. There's no way. My friend, there's just no way. The only way you're going to taste and see that the Lord is good, and that you're going to sit and eat at this banqueting house, is to come into the house and sit down. And when you do, you put your feet under the King's table, and you are fed of the King himself. Joy of all the earth. Beautiful situation. The place that your master calls you and he says, "Arise, my dove, my undefiled, and come away," is a place that is so wonderful. When God's people will labor and endeavor to labor together in that place, they're going to find fellowship and friendship and camaraderie because they have something in common. And the thing they have in common is that they love their husband, Jesus Christ. You see, they have been espoused to Him. Oh, why would one of God's people wait on the outside and say, "I can enjoy it just as good out here as you can down there at the table"? No, if you're going to taste and see that the Lord is good at His house, you're going to have to come in and sit down and sit at the table. See how good the Lord is. Come humbly before His people. And just like that eunuch told Philip, when he said, "Here's much water. What doth hinder me to be baptized?" And Philip said, "If thou believest with all thy heart, thou mayest." And he says, "I believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God." That's all it took. Not any lengthy exposition. Didn't have to explain to him about the doctrine of election and predestination and all that. I believe that Jesus is the Christ. My friends, how wonderful it is. Those of you that have been in the church for years, you've experienced the goodness of God. You've experienced the glory, how God leads His people, and how God blesses them. What I want you to see tonight is of how that friend of the bridegroom spends his life, spends his commission, spends his calling, building up the bridegroom as a friend of the bridegroom. He spends his energy telling you about Him. Just like that servant. And by the way, you read that whole chapter concerning Abraham's servant in Genesis 24, and the servant's name is not even mentioned. You know why? It's not important. You see, I've been called everything from Brother Butterick to Brother Bactry to Brother Bickney to Brother Hey You, and it doesn't make any difference to me. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. It's not important when I leave here, you know my name. That's not important to me. I hope you do know my name. So if you come through Arkadelphia, Arkansas, that's area code 501, and it's zip code 71923. If you come through there, I want you to know my name so you can stop and give me a call. And come and eat with us, spend the night with us. I want you to know my name for that. But as far as knowing who that servant's name was, no, sir. It's just not important. What's important is that I get a chance to tell you something about the bridegroom. Tell you about the place He has for you in this world. That's what's beautiful to me. To be able to tell you about what He's got for you people, for His people here in this world. And why, oh why? I can't figure it out, Brother Don. Why those who love it would continue to wait. Let's wait 10 days. No, the servant said, "Don't hinder me. My master has me on an errand, and I want to do what my master said to do." John said over there in the 3rd chapter of John, after saying that he was the friend of the bridegroom and he rejoices at the voice of the bridegroom, he made a statement that is so very important. When he said, "He must increase, and I must decrease." You see, get to where we see less and less of me and ourselves and more of Him. John had a commission. John had an office. John had a business. And his business was quickly coming to an end. He's going to go to prison and later be beheaded for the cause of his master. But he said, I must decrease. Boys, my job's going to come to the end someday. He said, he must increase. All that we can see in our lives, how, from time to time, when we take account, we can see Him increasing. His influence, His ways, His manner, His mind increasing. And myself, listen to this, my interests, my desires, me having to have my way all the time, my selfishness, my pride, seeing that decrease and being washed away, and seeing Jesus and His influence in my life increasing. That is a faithful servant, and will be rewarded as John the Baptist was. When the Lord told those people, one place He said to go show John. The other place He says, go tell John again these things. How did the blind see, the deaf hear, the lame walk, the dead are raised to life again, the poor have the gospel preached to them. How wonderful is it? Somebody says, John was weak. He got where he doubted the Lord. You know what the Lord said about him? We've got it recorded right here. The Lord said, I tell you that there is no greater man born of woman than John the Baptist. Why? Why did he receive such commendation from the Lord? Because he was a faithful friend of the bridegroom. He was faithful in what the Lord told him to do. He was faithful. Now, friends, what Brother Don tells you, what Brother Elvin tells you, what Brother Honeycutt tells you, is to point you to and show you the beauty of God's kingdom. To those of us that are in His kingdom, how important it is that we labor together, seeking God's guidance, we might know His will, and to exhort God's children on the outside that for some reason within themselves think that they can enjoy it just as much on the outside as they can on the inside. They say, oh friend, I just can't tell you. You just got to experience it. Come into this place that's beautiful for situation. Yes, the joy of the whole earth. May God bless you.
Sovereign Grace, a ministry of Paradise Primitive Baptist Church in Arlington, Texas. Paradise Primitive Baptist Church is located at 5300 Mansfield Road in Arlington, Texas. Services begin at 10:30 each Sunday morning. Plan to come and worship with us. To find out more about Paradise Primitive Baptist Church, visit www.paradisepbc.org. Be sure to visit our website for articles, video, and audio sermons, as well as biblical answers to your questions. Thanks for watching, and be sure to join us again next week. May God richly bless you.